Hello, everyone. My name is Gabrielle Welsh. I am the managing editor of The Scene, as well as the stage manager here at the Dialogues program. Thank you for joining us for the 2019 edition of EXPO Chicago, the International Exhibition of Contemporary and Modern Art. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to Dialogues, presented in partnership with the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Dialogues offers panel discussions, conversations, and provocative artistic discourse with leading artists, curators, designers, and arts professionals on the current issues that engage them. A special thank you to our partners, the Terra Foundation for American Art and the Chicago Humanities Festival. Taking place at EXPO Chicago last year, Creative Chicago, an interview marathon with Hans Ulrich Obrist, was a 5-hour series of conversations with artists, authors, architects, and others representing Chicago's diverse creative community. Join Stephanie Cristello, Artistic Director of EXPO Chicago and Editor-in-Chief of The Scene, who will lead a discussion with Terra Foundation President Elizabeth Glassman, Chicago Humanities Festival, Marilynn Thoma, Artistic Director Alison, Cuddy, and artists Barbara Kasten and Edra, Soto, for the unveiling of a publication that documents the event and explores the work of the 20-plus participants. The discussion will be immediately followed with a book signing with all the participants. Please join us in welcoming them to the stage.
Thank you, Gabrielle, and welcome everyone. We are so thrilled to be having this conversation today, 1 year after the monumentous event, as well as unveiling the book. And we're really pleased to be hosting this event. Unfortunately, Hans Ulrich Obrist, the artistic director of the Serpentine Galleries, cannot be with us today due to a family bereavement, but I can guarantee that we're all in good hands, and I just wanted to take a moment to thank him for all of his work in making the event possible last year, and the many contributions to the catalog that we'll be signing for the book later on. I wanted to first start with you, Elizabeth, to say a few words about Creative Chicago, what that meant to the city, and how everything from the Terra Foundation, really began, just as an opening for everyone.
Good, and thank you all for being here. I just wanted to give a little context to what took place last year, which was that part of our year-long celebration, Art Design Chicago, which had 95 partners across the city and was a celebration of the art and design legacy of Chicago's past and how it relates to the present. So we felt strongly that there needed to be one place where we talk about how some of these ideas that are so prevalent in Chicago came forward. And who better to do that with than EXPO, the Chicago Humanities Festival, and Navy Pier. And we appreciate all of their hard work, and Barbara Kasten's work animated the stage so beautifully. But all of our partners made this happen. And Hans Ulrich, as you know, is a man who I feel like his real curatorial strength is his conversations and creating dialogues. And he has always said that he was inspired by our own Studs Terkel in this, and who better to have as a mentor. So it became a key question for us was, what is needed in order to continue to carry forward the legacy of the energy of all the art of Chicago's past and recent present into the future, and how do artists of today see their role in animating those questions in society? So that was the context for Creative Chicago. We're really thrilled that it can continue and that the questions can only increase, and our awareness of the importance of the arts in creating the magnificence of our city and the civic dialogue continues under the auspices of EXPO and the Humanities Festival, Navy Pier, and all the partners and all the participants. So thank you.
Yeah. And it was such an important event for us and an important collaboration. And I think one of the greatest things that has come out of this project, which was, more than just Creative Chicago, it was multiple exhibitions throughout the city and abroad that we had the opportunity to partner with you last year is really this book launch, because it does continue a conversation and really deliver all of these dialogues into an archive and something that is publicly accessible and, you know, will continue to serve as research for many people to come for Chicago at this specific moment. Alison, I was wondering if you could say a few words on, you know, how our collaboration started also with the Humanities Festival and really taking the lead in shaping this entire program.
Sure, thank you, Stephanie. And I do have to say thank you to Liz and everyone at Terra for actually making this publication possible, because as you say, it's helping the event, not only the event live on, but sparking a dialogue that continues, that is very artist-driven, but includes everyone in the city and thinking about what does the city need and how can the arts ecosystem play a role in answering that question, or at least helping us think it through. And it was such an honor to be invited by the Terra to put together this event with EXPO, with Navy Pier, with all the artists who participated. This was Hans Ulrich Obrist's marathons, which he's been doing for a number of years, are always in cities, you know, Athens, London, in Hamburg, but this was the first one that was about a city, and it was the first American one. So it was the first time he did an interview marathon in the United States. So you can imagine we were all super thrilled to be partnering with him and considering what it means to actually take a city as the subject of your inquiry and really think about creativity in the context of a city. And so we were very much trying to think about how we could tap into and represent all the creative flows and dynamics of a city and how those cut across different artists. So a couple of things that we did in terms of imagining what that would look like was we took the legacy of theater, which is so important in Chicago. I think if you're from Chicago, you may know that this is the year of theater in Chicago, and we're really celebrating that legacy. And we were trying to design the structure of the marathon. We thought about it as a marathon in 4 acts. So we could look at creativity, past, present, and future, and really think about the people who were participating as kind of actors or figures in those different acts and how they could come together in dialogue. And that was the other piece of this we did that was a little bit different, which was Hans normally is in conversation one-on-one, and because we had so many amazing people in the marathon, some of whom are up on the stage here, some of whom are in the audience today, hi Brennan, we decided to put people together in conversation. And so thinking about how could the marathon not just be about creativity, but actually engender creativity by bringing together artists who had never met otherwise, but whose work spoke to one another and to the larger theme.
Absolutely, and I remember one highlight for us also was the idea to have Afrocobra and the Chicago Imagists be able to talk together, because there are these amazing histories, parallel histories that were in Chicago that perhaps didn't have the chance to intersect at that time, and this is really a way to bring that all together. So Elizabeth, in your remarks, you spoke about how this particular, you know, Hans Ulrich's finest curatorial art is really the art of conversation. And we envisioned this, I think, from the very beginning as a live exhibition. And of course, without Barbara Kasten, that wouldn't have really been possible. And Barbara, we were so thrilled when Alison and I did that initial studio visit with you and spoke to Hans Ulrich about the possibility of you designing the stage. And you really transformed this into a living artwork. So I was wondering if you could say a few words about your stage and what the installation meant to you.
Wow, is this on? Yeah, okay. Well, first of all, it was quite an honor to be chosen to do this, and I do remember that first visit, and we all kind of got the bright idea all at once, and it seemed to work really well. And for me, it was not only that I could create this setting, so to speak, and say something about the history of Chicago as well with the sculpture that I created, because my intent was to look back at two great giants that were here in the past and contributed so much to our culture through Moholy Nagy, who created, both of these people were at IIT. Moholy, of course, introduced a whole philosophy of education that, is now used worldwide and stems from the Bauhaus. And Mies, again, connected to the Bauhaus, transformed a lot of our landscape here in Chicago. And I just wanted to put myself into their company, so that's how that mix came. And it was such a wonderful thing to be able to sort of highlight these two people at a time when everybody is talking about immigration and worthiness of being in this country, et cetera. And we had right here in our own midst these two wonderful people who contributed so much to our culture and the world at large. So that's my political statement for the day, but and I truly believe that they had a lot to offer, and we benefited from that.
And Barbara, the work that was as part of the stage also began in an exhibition that took place within a Mies van der Rohe designed building. I'm wondering if you could speak a bit about that.
Yes, the concept was based on another project that I initiated and carried out at IIT in Crown Hall itself, which of course is Mies's iconic building. And I wanted to work with his architecture and with the artifacts of his teaching, which were the tables that the students labor over every day. And so took advantage of when they were off at summer, and I had the ability to kind of work in it as my own studio, and became very familiar and felt very close to the whole environment, and that's how this exercise came about. So what I did there was I created sculptures from their work tables, added my own, color, and kind of made a comment about architecture in that way, and then I made photographs. So it was a beautiful thing for me, and it gave me an opportunity to work in an environment that wasn't my studio, but I could make into my studio.
Yeah. And that image is on the cover of this book, and
Yes,
it's
right.
really an iconic piece, and we're so thrilled to have presented it. So I'm wondering now if Edra and Sue Ellen, if you could say a few words about what it meant for you to be a part of this marathon, and what the conversations have continued to leave you thinking about, and how it might affect your work in the future.
Thank you. Well, first I was incredibly honored to be invited. It was I always think about this as a very important part of the history of my career as an artist, to be a part of this moment. I also see it as a representation of Latino culture, which is so important in Chicago, and sometimes I feel there's a lack of representation in rigorous conversations, and I felt really excited that I could represent a voice of Latino culture through my participation. Yeah.
Is this on? Yeah. Well, I really enjoyed being part of the marathon. And my part of the marathon, I was interviewed with Art Green and Gerald Williams from Afrocobra. And I hadn't met Gerald Williams before. And, as you mentioned, we were contemporaries. So I think that was very interesting, bringing us together. And, as well as the questions that Hans asked, we asked each other questions. So I enjoyed that very much. And the book is really wonderful. I'm so glad, because it allows the marathon to live after. And so I was very pleased to be part of it.
I have just one question for you. Have you kept in contact with Gerald or any of the other Afro-Cobra artists since?
No, I haven't. I'm sorry.
It's the opportunity, though.
But there was a wonderful exhibition at the Smart Museum.
Yes, absolutely.
That had work from the Imagist and Afro-Cobra, which I thought was really, I'm forgetting the name of it. Do you recall the name of it?
It was called
The Time Is Now. Yeah, which I think was really important.
There have been some interesting collaborations that have come out of
I want to hear.
the Creative Chicago. And I was
Yes.
going to say Joseph Grigley is also here today, who houses part of Hans Ulrich Obrist's archive in Chicago. I mean, Chicago is a really interesting touchstone for Hans Ulrich through Studs Terkel and through his archive being here. And there is another publication coming out of the marathon that is about the notes. So the copious notes, if you've watched Hans Ulrich do an interview, you know he has like piles of books and piles of notes. And so there's a whole publication that Joseph's working on that's coming out of that. The architect Amanda Williams and the writer Eula Biss have been connecting and talking about ways of engaging, and Barbara and Jeannie Gang, who you wouldn't necessarily put Barbara Kasten next to Jeannie Gang, even though they're both amazing artists in Chicago, but there's a lot of connections. I mean, from my point of view, just the really intense focus on materials, and that is a part of the process of making their work and their research, and that was one thing that really tied them together in fascinating ways. Obviously, an interest in architecture and building as reflected in your work, but so it's one of the things that's been really fascinating, seeing the kind of relationships that are developed out of this. And again, I think gives a really kind of complicated view of what collaboration is, because so often we talk about Chicago and art in Chicago as being very collaborative, and it definitely is, but I think it's often driven by forms of work. That's the first point at which people engage. And what was interesting about the marathon is it revealed that sometimes people don't meet in the way that Harry Hu and Afro-Cobra didn't meet. And this was a meeting of people. So they were meeting each other as equals, interviewing each other. And I think out of that, we'll see things emerging that may give rise to very different forms for the people who participated.
Well, I have to say, I think you gave it a lot of thought to who was going to be with who, because it made a difference to be up there with somebody that you could relate to, because it's a little freaky to be interviewed by Hans, you know? I mean, it's like, oh my God, you know, here's this man, and he's world-renowned, and what am I have to say to him? So it was very relaxing, and it really, besides being very beneficial, to the program, it was a way of putting us in a kind of an easier context.
And I know from his perspective too, I think he learned so much from all of the participants, and it was really important to his practice. So as much as you felt that way, it was perhaps the other way around. Anyway, so I wanted to just maybe close the conversation for now and encourage everyone to continue speaking with us all after Liz speaks.
I have one question. Well, first I want to just congratulate and acknowledge Eva Silverman and Jenny Siegenthaler, who were instrumental in getting this book to us today. It's a beautiful book, and I think it'll have a lot of opportunity. When you're listening, you can listen with one ear, but when you're reading it, you can mull over some of the ideas. And I also want to say to the panelists, so if you're projecting yourself into the next 4 years, what do you hope some of the questions that we will all be addressing might be? You know, what are you thinking about now as a result? Sometimes, you know, asking a question causes you to ask the next question. And so I'm just curious if there are things that you feel that as your role as an artist in the city that you would like to be thinking over the next few years, if that's not too ambitious. Or what are you thinking about? I don't know. Let's have a conversation. Let's talk, as we say.
Oh, I'm not sure. I'm sort of thinking about my next exhibition.
Well, that's a good one. We hope to see that. It's great.
Well, I'm really honored. I'm going to be showing in Vienna at Secession. So I'm very excited. Yeah. And I also will have the opportunity to do an artist book, which I haven't done before. And so I'm really, really excited about that. What else am I thinking?
Well, I do think about the future in the arts and what will be relevant. I think about right now, what is happening right now, and I feel like if we sort of went back to a more conservative way of like market-wise, I feel like it became conservative again. There's a lot of painting again, which I love painting. I actually graduated from the painting department. I don't make paintings from the Art Institute. I don't make paintings anymore, but I greatly appreciate painting. So, but I question, like, wow, it feels very conservative considering all we have learned and on all the history we have experienced. So what does that mean? That's what I'm wondering in terms of the market. And in terms of my personal artist practice, yeah, I think I always feel like I love being supportive to other artists, and that's why I have a project space in my backyard where is the most I can do with running a personal career as well, and it becomes a complicated question, like what it will be the future. Do you know the future?
I don't.
Barbara?
No, I don't. I have no clue. But
We've
but
been wondering about this.
I think there's a lot going on in Chicago right now already that is in the same venue and ideology that you were trying to promote and instigate. For instance, I happen to be that age where I have a lot of young followers, and I think it's a fantastic thing to have that kind of support from a different generation of people and artists, and a lot of it is kind of what Chicago is, which is a very friendly entity, and people help each other, and we have attracted others to seem to help us continue that. For instance, I have my studio at Mana Contemporary, and it's a huge building full of artist studios, and everybody from somebody right out of school to somebody my age has a studio there. So it's a great opportunity for this mixing and mingling that happens, and I think it's very successful because it generates the right feeling and attitude about helping each other and keeping our community and keeping our morals and our values on straight. I mean, I think it's just a wonderful opportunity, and Chicago's always been like that. I think there's been. I always thought of Chicago when I first came back, because I am from Chicago. There were all these apartment galleries and people showing in their backyards and, just changing the landscape of the gallery system right here in Chicago. And I think that's a wonderful thing. And I think it's kind of unique to our big Midwestern mentality and heart in a way. So I hope that continues and gets even better, really.
I wanted to add my thanks to Jenny Siegenthaler and Eva Silverman, because having this book, I mean, we were there for the whole 5 hours, but I mean, I was reading the interview with Edra, for example, and she said something about her research into pattern that I hadn't caught while I was at the event. So it's just wonderful to have this, to be able to go back and reflect on this. And I think the conversation that started with this between CHF and Terra with EXPO continues, and we just did an event around Creative Chicago, continuing to do work on this and asking the question, what does Chicago need? Which was a question that was posed to everyone who participated. And things like, we need more friendship, or we need to try harder, or we need more empathy were some of the answers. And so those as kind of currents that we can continue to pursue through conversation is really interesting to us.
And perhaps as a final thank you from EXPO, also I wanted to thank Philip Bahar from the Chicago Humanities Festival and Tony Carmen from EXPO, who were really instrumental in also making all of this possible, and of course to all of you. Thank you so much. I hope that you can all join us to get a copy of this wonderful book and continue the conversation into the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie.